So I've been organizing this conference for almost 10 years, and I've never been up here, so be gentle with me. Thank you. So I have no disclosures. Today, I want to kind of talk about thinking about the future, planning, caregiver issues, coping issues, kind of the big picture non-medical stuff. With Parkinson's, we talk a lot about the medical aspects, but there's a whole nother aspect of Parkinson's which you are all dealing with on a daily basis. If you're in a partnership with somebody who has Parkinson's, it's yours too. So it's kind of a joint effort, and Parkinson's, if you're in a marriage, can be sort of the third entity in that marriage. So I think it's important to address kind of the non-medical issues that happen for people along the spectrum. So it starts with diagnosis, right? So oftentimes when you get your diagnosis, you may have been expecting it, you may have done some research before you even went to the doctor, or it may come as a complete shock to you. And with diagnosis, there's a lot of common emotions that people feel. I've listed some of them here. It can be shock, you can be in denial about it. There can be a sense of powerlessness around it. This thing has just been heaped on us and we don't know what to do with it and we can't control it. And that can be a very disorienting feeling. There can be a lot of anger with it. There can be anxiety about what it all means. There can be depression that can go along with diagnosis. And there can also be kind of a sense of grieving that happens with it. Grief and loss is something that sort of remains a constant across the spectrum of a chronic illness. Sometimes it's more present than other times, but just like when we lose somebody who's important to us, grieving is an ongoing process across the lifespan, and the same sort of experience can happen with a chronic illness diagnosis. So in Parkinson's, we can see a sense of grief and loss that can be part of the ongoing journey. People talk a lot about what grief looks like. There's a lot of theories about it. There's been a lot of research about it. Some people talk about stages of grief, and some people think of it as more of a linear thing that you move through. Some people think of a grief and loss process as more of a circular process. For me, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that it's ongoing. And in the sense of a diagnosis like this, it can often be like unacknowledged or unappreciated by other people. You may, and you yourself, may not always realize that there's almost a constant sense of loss coming back up. Anytime a new thing becomes a challenge, or you have to struggle to accomplish something that you never had to struggle with before, that can bring up that sense of grief and loss and powerlessness and helplessness and frustration that you may have felt at the beginning. So that's something that can be part of your journey throughout. Other people not seeing it or understanding it, we can't expect others to understand what we're going through or necessarily know what we're going through, so I think it's really important to at least acknowledge for yourself. If something has become a struggle and you're now having more issues around grief with that loss, I think it's okay to talk to other people about it and to educate them that grief is ongoing and it's gonna come up for you and you're gonna respond to it and you're gonna cope with it and you're gonna find a place for it, and then the next challenge is gonna come. So how do we cope with all of these things? I think education is empowering. So if you can spend some time and put some energy into educating yourself, you're gonna feel a little bit more of a sense of empowerment over what your journey looks like. Understanding what your diagnosis is and what it means, seeking out reputable sources of information. There's a lot of information out there on the internet at our fingertips, and not all of it is good or accurate. So if there's any question at all about the resources that you're looking at, talk to your doctor, reach out to a support group, contact the Michigan Parkinson's Foundation. Make sure that the information you are getting about your disease process is accurate and up to date. The worst thing is to get inaccurate information and have that form how you process things or move forward with things or decisions you make about your treatment and care. It's really crucial to have good, accurate, up-to-date information. Be an active part of your care team. You have to drive your train, right? The doctors will give you their best recommendations based on the information that they have and also based on the information they know about you. If you withhold information that's crucial in terms of how you manage your life, what your belief systems are, how you perceive things like taking medication, how medication fits or doesn't fit into your life, those are really important pieces of information for your physician to know so that they can work with you in a way that's going to allow you to manage your care day to day. That half hour in the office with your doctor every few months, that's just a snapshot in time. So the other information that informs your life on a day-to-day basis, we don't see that, we don't know that, and we rely on you to give us that information so that we can work with you in a way that will work for you. Preparing for medical appointments, I think, is really important. It allows you to get the most out of that time that you have with your doctor. Again, it's just a snapshot in time. So being prepared with, what are my symptoms? What does it look like? How do my symptoms correlate with my medication dosing times? Is there something new or different since the last time I saw the doctor? Those are really important things to make sure that you're communicating. Including somebody in your appointments with you, I think, is really valuable. And it's not an issue of I can't handle my own appointments. It's an issue of having another brain in the room to ask questions, another set of ears to hear what's being discussed. We all hear things and process them a little bit differently. So having, four ears listening over 2 ears is going to give you that much more to work with. Do release of information and durable power of attorney also. The release of information allows the people that you value to be included in those medical discussions. At U of M, we have a form that allows verbal communication. Most health systems are probably going to have something like that, so that if you have somebody who's very involved in your care and maybe calls the doctor's office, if they don't have that person is an okay person to talk to, they're going to have to protect your privacy, and it's going to be that much more of an effort for them to be involved in your care. So looking for things like release of information or clinical communication, those sorts of forms that you can get filled out will benefit you in the long run. And then durable power of attorney. The paperwork, I think, is important and valuable to have on file, but I think the most important thing is thinking about who you would want to make your decisions for you if you were unable to make them for yourself. And the key is really the conversation around that. So whoever you choose to be your decision maker, if you were unable, has to know what you would do for yourself and has to be able to make those decisions as you would for yourself. That's key. We all have different belief systems, different values, and if you choose somebody who has a different value system and can't decide for you as you would for yourself because of their own values or beliefs, that's going to cause a conflict in terms of decision making going forward. So really having that conversation and being really straightforward about, what does my quality of life mean to me? What's important to me? Are there hard lines for me that I don't want crossed as far as going forward with care? So those are important things to have conversations about. So when we think about Parkinson's, again, it's a chronic and it's a progressive situation. So you first get your diagnosis. There may not be a whole lot of impact or change in your day-to-day life. You've got your diagnosis, you're learning about it, you're sort of taking it all in. Maybe you're talking with family and friends about it. You may be starting to think about, am I going to be able to keep working the way I am? What do I need to think about as far as my career? Right at the beginning is the best time to start thinking about planning financials and getting your legal house in order. And what I mean by that is thinking about, I know I'm going to have care needs that I wasn't necessarily expecting. What does that look like, and how do I plan to be able to care for myself the way I want to? It's a good time to talk to a financial planner, maybe an elder law attorney who can work with you around planning for your medical care, planning for your personal care. Those are important things to start thinking about before you think you need it. Longtermcare.gov is a website, and they have sort of an age-related planning tool where you can sort of look at your age group and it'll guide you through what are the things to think about at this time in my life. So I think it's a great tool to kind of get the process started for yourself. So mostly you're just kind of cruising along. Things are probably not ruffling your feathers too much right now. As the journey continues, you may find that a little more help is needed. Here's where caregivers can struggle. How much is enough help? How much is too much help? We never want to be in a situation where we're sort of taking somebody's autonomy and independence from them in an effort to help, but that can be a really hard place to balance. And I think having conversations about that across the spectrum is really important. Keeping that line of communication open so that we're always sort of acting and treating each other in a respectful way while still facilitating independence and safety. At this point, work status may change. It really may have sort of come to a point where getting through that day or completing the job in the same way has just become too difficult. There might be financial concerns related to stopping working or going on disability. There's emotional fallout. A lot of times we identify very strongly with what we do. Who we are often equates with what we do. And so there's an emotional process that goes hand in hand with work status changes. This is the time where, if you haven't already, you really need to start planning your financials and getting your legal house in order. Again, you want to be prepared to be able to manage things as they come versus responding to them when they're already here. When you wait until you have to respond to something that's already happened, your choices are fewer, the urgency is higher, and it's just a more uncontrolled way of dealing with things. If you're planning and you're getting things in order for yourself before you actually need it, it's going to be a much smoother process for you. People can find that kind of at this point, independence can be challenged in different ways. Sometimes ADLs, like routine everyday activities, bathing, dressing, can be more difficult for people with Parkinson's. Sometimes the higher level daily tasks can be either impossible or so challenging that they get transferred to somebody else. Driving is a good example. Sometimes managing the financials day to day is another one that can get turned over to a partner because it just becomes too difficult to keep everything in order. When these things start to happen, the caregiver independence is also impacted because there's more attention needed to manage things day to day. And so oftentimes caregivers are challenged with, how do I keep doing my own thing and make sure that my loved one is safe and cared for too? So that balancing act becomes far more difficult. It can be even more challenging if you've got parents or children that you're trying to care for at the same time, because really it's hard to have three of you doing three different things at the same time when there's actually only one body doing it. So balancing all of those different aspects of caregiving is really challenging at that point. One thing that I always encourage people to think about at this point, again, before you need it, home modifications. Is your home a place that is either already for you to age in place or can be brought to a situation where you can age in place? For example, is everything on the upper floors? Do you need a chairlift? Are there grab bars in the bathroom? Can you navigate through the house? Is it wide enough for you to navigate maybe with walking aids like walkers or wheelchairs? If not, this is really the time where you should be thinking about, do we need to relocate to a setting that's going to work better for us? maybe a condo that's on one level, maybe a smaller house on one level. What is it that's going to allow you to continue your journey without huge upheaval every step of the way? So I always encourage people to think about, if we plan on staying where we are, what do we need to do now to make it work for us then? Again, in advance versus in response to. At this point, people can also start to have some struggles with communication, feeling okay to talk about what's happening and the changes that are sort of coming up and the struggles that people are feeling challenged by. There can be issues with changing roles and the relationship changes in response to that. It can be difficult to find resources if you don't know where to look. Managing stress. That's something we all struggle with day to day, but that can be increased as caregiving is increased or as independence and ability, self-ability, is decreased. Coping with that change is a whole thing in and of itself, and there's a lot of emotional response to that, just in addition to the logistical aspects of coping with change. I also see a lot of times that this is a point where sort of everything becomes about Parkinson's. It used to be you were living your life and doing your thing, and now everything is sort of under this umbrella of Parkinson's or viewed through the lens of Parkinson's. And that's very real, but that's when it becomes very present, that here's this other partner in our relationship. Parkinson's is always with us, and everything is influenced by Parkinson's being a part of our lives. As things move on, it can become a little more difficult. The road can become a little rockier. Significant help may be needed versus just occasional assistance. People can become more dependent in terms of those higher level tasks and chores. They may find that they're dependent for things like help with bathing and dressing, which is a really difficult place. For somebody to have to turn to somebody else to do something for them that they've done their entire lives on their own is a very challenging place to be. There can be cognitive and psychiatric changes. Dementia can start to be noticed, hallucinations, delusions. There can even be issues with psychosis related to Parkinson's. So these are some of the really challenging things that can come up as the disease progresses. Again, this is a time to evaluate, can we keep going the way we're going, or do we need help? Is this a time that we need to start bringing people in to help, getting family or friends more involved, using our support system to navigate on a day-to-day basis? Is the home setting itself still manageable? Can you still negotiate safely through that home? Or again, is it time to think about other options, other settings? Is the home okay, or is it a situation where assisted living is needed, that the assistance needs have reached that level where it's not just one person able to help anymore, where there might need to be a staff that's available? Sometimes people look at multi-level care facilities where there might be like an independent living setting, and then if needs progress, they can move to an assisted living in the same sort of campus, or even a skilled nursing setting on the same campus. So there's a lot of options out there, and there's more options that are being built and popping up as our population ages. So these are things to familiarize yourself with, again, before you need it. People ideally want to stay in their own house and bring people in if there's help needed. So thinking about what are the resources there and planning for that in advance. I also always suggest to people that if you're bringing somebody into your house, again, do it before you need it, and do it before it's at that level of that sort of really personal care. Everyone needs the opportunity to get used to having somebody around and to have trust with that person and to feel okay to let somebody touch you or assist you with personal care needs. So bringing somebody in more of a companion care level, where somebody is maybe just around to help out, and the caregiver has the opportunity to leave for a little while and do errands or get together with friends before it becomes sort of an invasive personal care feeling. Everyone needs to adjust and get used to this. And again, it's always better to do it before it's at a necessary place. When you're planning ahead, there's a lot of conversations to have. Again, durable power of attorney for medical decision making, understanding what the limits of that are, and putting the documentation on file. A durable power of attorney is not active until the person cannot make their own decisions. And that has to be, medical decision making has to be a part of that. So physician, psychiatrist has to be involved in basically deciding that the person is not capable of making their own decisions. Being somebody's durable power of attorney it's not like a guardian where you are in a position to make decisions for somebody else against their will if they are capable. Financial planning and protections, doing things like wills, estate planning, trusts, and working with an elder law attorney to make sure that what you want is very clear. It's a way to protect your partner. If there's things that you specifically want done, having them in writing and working with an attorney to make that happen is what's going to protect you in the long run. I think it's also important to have what-if conversations, because it, again, gives you a sense of what are my limits? If this were to happen, what's the response that we want? So having those what-if conversations can really kind of be enlightening as far as what things should look like and what you want them to look like so that you can put protections in place to make it happen. So when people think about needing help and supportive care and services, that can look really different, and it can feel really limited, but I encourage people to really sort of think outside the box with it. So I think in terms of both formal and informal support services. Formal services can be skilled care like nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists. That can happen, both inside and outside the home. Adult day programs are great opportunities for socialization, to give caregivers a break. Some are focused on memory care. Some are just when somebody isn't safe to be by themselves, they might need more help with things, but it's a way to get some social contact, activities. Companion care or chore services, those can be obtained through home care agencies. Respite care can also be obtained through home care agencies, and there's some more formal respite opportunities like longer term respite, usually through like extended care facilities, like for a week if somebody needs to go away. Excuse me. Home health aides, personal care aides through agencies. Meal and nutrition programs like Meals on Wheels or congregate meals. There's social programs, senior activities, senior learning. A lot of senior center activities are directed at that social connection, but also either a learning or an educational component. There's transportation services, and then there's also emotional support. Therapists, formal counseling. But I think it's important to call out that the informal services list is almost as long as the formal services list, because many of these things can happen in a more informal way. Companion care or help with chores, these are things that a lot of times you'll find people develop friendships in support groups, and maybe they trade off. The guys are going to come to my house today and they'll go to your house tomorrow, so people can share informally caring for their loved ones. Sometimes people will do meal prep sharing, where I'll cook this week and I'll cook enough for 3 days and then you cook next week. Respite can also be the same. People can have regularly scheduled respite through an informal route, like a friend, a family member. Again, meal sharing, social and enrichment activities can be, we get together and we play cards once a week with friends, or we go to the movies on Saturday night, or we do Sunday brunch together. These are important things to continue doing, and they're just as important in terms of staying connected and having support. And again, emotional support. This can be through talking to friends, this can be through support groups, this can be family support. So there's a lot out there, but people often feel like this is ours and we need to manage it on our own. But it takes a village. When people think about support services, they're often really disappointed to hear that Medicare is not their golden ticket to support services. So I think it's really important to understand what Medicare can and can't do for you. Medicare can do facility-based skilled care in sort of a rehab situation. It requires a 3-day inpatient stay. So if somebody was hospitalized and they were inpatient for 3 days, and then the care team inpatient says, well, they need some intensive physical therapy, they need rehab, Medicare will pay for a rehab stay where all of that intensive work is happening. Typically, with the Medicare, it covers 20 days if you've already met your deductible for the year. And then on the 21st day beyond, then there's a daily per day amount. And a lot of times the Medicare supplements that people have will cover that. Not always, but many of them do. Excuse me. I want to actually just make sure that it's to call out the difference between an inpatient stay and an observation stay. An observation stay is not the same as inpatient, and it's a really important thing to just kind of have in the back of your mind and kind of tune into. Somebody could be in the hospital for 3 days and still be on observation status. So it's really important to just check in with your care team and know, are we on inpatient or are we on observation? Typically, the teams will make those changes along the way, especially if they know that somebody is going to need some intensive therapies afterwards. But as a self-advocacy tool, just know that inpatient and observation stays are different, and observation stays really don't give you the benefits of your insurance covering for that aftercare. Medicare will also cover some skilled services at home if homebound criteria is met. And homebound criteria doesn't mean you can never leave the home. It just means that it's a significant hardship to do so to obtain those services. So a lot of times people will get home PT or home PT-OT or maybe speech therapy, and that would be covered by Medicare again if homebound status is met. There's some limited home health aid available through Medicare, meaning somebody to come and help with personal care, usually a couple of hours, a couple of days a week. So it's not a lot and it's not long term, but it's just something to be aware of that may be available to you if you're getting skilled services in the home. Medicare will also cover some DME, and there's limits on that. And then in terms of long-term care, no, Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. So your long-term care planning should not involve basically your health insurance because it's not covered. If you have a long-term care plan, I don't see many of those anymore, but some folks have long-term care plans that they've held on to for a while. That may assist with some long-term care planning. But your long-term care plans should be about how are we going to use our resources and how are we making sure that we can take care of ourselves in the long term. I'm sorry? What is DME? Oh, durable medical equipment. Sorry. Some people are Medicaid eligible, so Medicaid has some pretty strict income and asset limits, but if somebody is Medicaid eligible, that would cover facility-based skilled care, home-based skilled care, some custodial care, but the person would have to meet nursing home criteria, meaning that they would need a certain level of skilled care to be able to get nursing home care. Home-based custodial care versus in an extended care facility or a nursing home, there's a program called the My Choice Waiver. That is one way that people can get assistance through Medicaid while being able to stay at home versus nursing home placement if the needs are that high. There's typically a waiting list. Most counties, I think the waiting list is upwards of a year or two. So this is never something that should be depended on. Again, you want to try to plan as best you can so that these aren't services that you need to rely on because you need them when you need them. You don't want to just be on a waiting list. Medicaid will also cover DME and potentially some non-medical things. I've seen some things like grab bars in certain settings have been covered by Medicaid. There are policies that address spousal impoverishment. And so one can be potentially Medicaid eligible without having to be poverty stricken as a couple. So it's important to kind of, again, work with an elder law attorney around protection of assets while still potentially being Medicaid eligible. So medical trusts and all of those sorts of pre-planning things are important aspects to talk about when you're doing your overall planning. Other sources of payment for supportive care, long-term care is, again, long-term care insurance, self-pay. Some insurances may offer limited respite or home care. It's really rare that I see that anymore, but I have on a couple of occasions seen that there's some limited respite care through like a commercial or a private insurance. Sometimes VA benefits are an avenue, so if there's a veteran, there may be some VA eligible services. Unfortunately, there's a lot of blank space on this slide because there's not a lot of other payment sources available. This is really, again, where your personal planning is beneficial for you. So when you think about these things, I think about it in terms of like spin a web of services. Don't look for one specific thing to meet all needs. It's about piecing together a number of different services to give you a strong net underneath. So combining formal and informal services will stretch your resources in terms of, you know, the most bang for your buck. So if you have more informal support regularly lined up, say a family member comes over 3 days a week, that's 3 days a week that you don't have to have a home care organization coming in for you. So really sort of stretching your resources as far as you can while still putting together something that keeps everybody safe and sane. It can be really, really uncomfortable to start doing this sort of thing, to bring people in, to ask for help, to rely on others, to trust others. And so again, baby steps and really before you think you need it is when to start doing it. You want to really be creative about this and always maintaining social interaction. So it can become very isolating when you're dealing with day-to-day care issues, but there's a lot of other people out there doing the same thing. And so if you can connect with your community, whether it's a church family, whether it's support groups, keeping that social connection, and again, being willing to ask for and accept help. Most of us are thrilled when we have the ability to help somebody else, to do something for somebody else, but we're often very resistant to letting others help us. So just really think about how good it feels when you can do something for somebody else and give somebody else the ability to do that for you. Let them feel good for a minute by helping you with something. Excuse me. Area Agency on Aging, if you only have one resource that you ever remember, somebody told me I could find out stuff about things in the community, Area Agency on Aging, start there. Every county in the state has an Area Agency on Aging that covers that area. So each county is going to be different, but they provide information and referral assistance. They are typically involved in managing Meals on Wheels programs. They can sometimes help with direct home care services or care management services. A lot of times they're the My Choice waiver kind of owner for the area. That's the Medicaid program we talked about earlier. They can often connect you to adult day services, chore services, home injury control, or basically like safe navigating around your home. They can do advocacy, they can do transportation assistance, and oftentimes they have a lot of caregiver resources like caregiver education classes. Some of them even on their websites will have checklists of what to ask a home care company if I'm going to bring somebody in. There's a lot of resources out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If something doesn't quite fit you, that's fine, but you have a foundation to start with and to build from. So with Area Agency on Aging, I just wanted to kind of show the map. Some of the areas are much larger. I think it's probably based on population, but every area of the state has an Area Agency on Aging. So that's always a good first step. Commission on Aging, some have both Commission on Aging and Area Agency on Aging, so you could also search Commission on Aging. There might be something out of your local county or city that, excuse me, they'll often partner with Area Agency on Aging, but they may also do their own services. Senior nutrition programs are available in most places. Things like Meals on Wheels and congregate meals. It can just be like that one little thing or that one less thing that you need to do every day. So if you're getting Meals on Wheels delivery once a day, that's, it just takes that little bit of burden off. Congregate meal programs, often at like senior centers or community centers, that's a great way to stay connected to community and have some social opportunity while having a meal. Some of these are free, some of them will have a suggested donation. Each one runs a little bit differently, but I think they're good opportunities to stay connected to community that a lot of times people may not think about. When you're hiring help, there's home care agencies and there's private hires. So there's pros and cons to both. Hiring through a home care agency, you have to think in terms of $25 to $35 an hour, and some of them have hourly limits per visit. So they may say, a 2-hour minimum for a visit. The liability is theirs, they're the employer, and they're responsible for training the staff. So in that sense, there's some pros there. You have less control over who your staff is, and so there's some limits there. Private hire can look like companion care, similar to what a home care agency might do, and it might, excuse me, also include bathing. Sometimes people will do private hires and they can maybe negotiate a lower cost with somebody, like their neighbor's niece is in nursing school and would love to take on some care. The downside of that is that you are the employer, the liability is yours. It does give you more control and choice and flexibility about who's coming into your home, but there's the potential for reduced reliability, and you don't know what the training is like. So everyone sort of has to make their own decisions about that. Sometimes people do a combination, again, stretching their resources. These are more local resources, but so like Catholic Social Services in Washtenaw County, I know not everybody's in Washtenaw, but that's a good organization to find different services. There's similar organizations called different things like Catholic Charities in Southeast Michigan that cover a number of other counties. There can be counseling available through there. There could be resource and referral through there. So those are some other resources. Caregiving.org is a website that has a lot of great information and guides and tip sheets, and it's just a really helpful resource. Alzheimer's Association can be a great resource for things like dementia. And information around that. Senior centers usually are very connected to the community and knowledgeable about community resources in that area. So I think it's always a good idea to connect to a senior center. A Place for Mom is a website / organization that can help people find facilities. I've not had a lot of people that I've worked with use A Place for Mom, but the ones who have told me that they have used them have been very happy with that experience. So that's a potential resource. And then if you go to a clinic that has a social worker, they're a great resource for you. So when we think about caregiving, in general, caregivers show higher levels of depression and anxiety. They suffer from higher levels of stress and frustration. They tend to be in worse health because they're not caring for themselves as much as they're caring for their person. Stressful caregiving situations can potentially lead to harmful behaviors for the carer and the caree. There's an increased risk of heart disease in caregivers, and they have lower levels of overall self-care. Female caregivers tend to show these effects more than male caregivers. Excuse me. So yeah, I'm so calm, happy, and well-rested, said no caregiver ever. So know this going in and take care of yourself before you think you need to. When I think about working with providers like medical staff, other providing staff, things that we kind of have to have awareness of are that most caregivers say that they haven't been asked how they're doing and what they need to be able to provide care. Only about 32% report being asked about their caregiving status. And then half of that 32% have been asked what they need to care for themselves. So usually when people are asked what they need, it's about what do you need to care for your person. So I think as providers, we have to be aware of our caregivers needing us to pay attention to them too and check in with them. But I think when you're a caregiver, it's also really good to check in with other people that you know are caregivers. Again, that's where things like support groups can be really helpful. There's caregiving support groups. A lot of times Parkinson support groups will do breakout sessions where the caregivers get together and the folks living with Parkinson's get together. And so they can, kind of focus on themselves a little bit and feel free to speak without potentially worrying about hurting the other one's feelings. So I always want to remind people to notice and express concern for caregivers. A lot of times what I found in my own work is if I ask about the caregiver themselves, they tend to start talking about their person. So I work real hard to redirect them back and say, but let's talk about you. Where are you at? How are you doing? We tend to not want to bring attention to ourselves when we feel responsible for somebody else, but it's important for you to pay attention as a caregiver to where you are. Your ability to care for somebody else hinges on your own self-care being solid first. We always want to think about caregivers educating or care providers educating their caregivers, empowering and providing resources. So these are things that you guys should know and ask of your providers too, because sometimes reminding them can help them take care of you together. We also want to pay attention to giving permission for self-care. And again, this is something that can happen in a more informal way, excuse me, like at support groups. When you see a friend in a support group that seems to be really stressed out or maybe needs a little bit of a boost, checking in with them and reminding them how important it is to care for themselves too, and maybe figuring out a way to help them care for themselves. Do you need to arrange a respite day where you're taking turns to give that little bit of a break to make sure that everybody is paying attention to what needs to happen for themselves? So I find it really interesting and wonderful, the range of emotions that I see with caregivers, because we can have all these sort of negative things that can kind of come up as a caregiver. You can feel resentful, you can feel exhausted, you can feel really alone and isolated, you can feel helpless, you can feel devalued, you can feel depressed and anxious and afraid and frustrated and invisible in the big scheme of things. But at the same time, there's the converse of that, where people feel really capable and competent because of what they're doing and how well they're doing it, and loving towards their person that they're caring for, and also loved by their person. They can feel really valued and appreciated. They can feel really honored to be in that role as a caregiver. They can feel important and needed. They can feel appreciative of their ability to do that for somebody else. They can feel really fulfilled by that caregiving experience, and they can feel really proud and protective of their person. But I hear this a lot. Everything you do is wrong. Sometimes, excuse me, I'll ask a caregiver how they're doing, and they just let loose and start crying because there's so much happening for them on a daily basis, and they feel like no matter what they do, it's not enough, or no matter what they do, they didn't do it right. And I think it's really important just to kind of check in and say, okay, everything I do is not wrong, and I'm doing the very best I know how, and if I don't know how to do something, I know that it's okay for me to reach out and get some help with that. So sort of simple tidbits about self-care is trying to maintain a positive attitude. It gives you the power over your circumstances. You can feel really beaten down and it can be really frustrating, but if you can try to maintain a positive attitude and find that one positive, joyful, silly, funny thing in a situation or a day, it can be uplifting and it can help you keep a little bit of balance. Self-care, maintaining a routine. Having something that you know is going to happen day to day in a scheduled way can allow you better planning. We know that with medications for Parkinson's, it's really important to stay on that schedule and in that routine. So building your daily routine around making sure that the things that have to happen at a certain time are happening at a certain time, pairing them with specific activities on a day-to-day basis, all of those things can make it a little bit easier. Getting up at the same time every day and going to bed at the same time every day can help with sleep. And so maintaining, a routine around that can be really helpful and give you the wherewithal to get through every day. Exercise. Exercise is good for everybody, we know this. Exercise is good for people with Parkinson's, we know this. Exercise is also really good for managing stress, keeping our energy levels up. So exercising together or exercising individually, if it's something, find something that works. The best exercise for you is the one that you're willing to do at least several times a week. Every day is better. But doing something physical every day allows you to kind of clear your mind and raise your energy level, and it can help manage mood. Keeping your sense of humor. Really, I'm a 12-year-old boy inside this body. I love little silly puns. So here's some puns. Hopefully they make you laugh. Keeping that social interaction up. Really, really important. Staying connected to the world around you. Again, it can be through exercise classes, it can be through support groups, it can be through learning opportunities at senior centers or community centers, it can be through a weekly card game, it can be through a weekly dinner with friends. Keeping those social interactions up are going to provide you support that you're not even really thinking about, but it's a release, and it's a change of scenery, and it's a way to stay connected. Be flexible. There's so much we can't control in the world of Parkinson's that we have to be able to kind of be flexible and change and, you know, roll with the punches, kind of. You know, there has to be a willingness to say, okay, this isn't working right now, we'll try it again in an hour, or, oh, we can't do this right now, but we can do it tomorrow. Just really trying to stay mobile with your day-to-day situation. Find and use support, ask for help, accept help. As much as you can help other people can help you. So looking at your formal and your informal respite, looking at your adult day programs, your senior service organizations, family, friends, support groups, church community. Talk to your professionals, your physicians, your nurse practitioners, your clinic social workers. Talk to them about what are the resources out there for you. And if people are giving you information, ask them for handouts. Ask them to print it for you. Ask them to write it down, because you'll have that conversation and you'll think it's all tucked in your brain, and then you walk out the door and with all the other details, you've forgotten it. So ask for things either printed in writing so that you can refer back to them. Manage your stress. There's a lot of ways to manage stress. There's a little collage here. I like massage myself, but everybody has their own way of doing it. Things like mindfulness can be really good for anxiety and stress management. So meditation, breathing exercises, guided imagery, yoga. A lot of these sort of routine activities that you hear about are great things to build into your repertoire on a daily basis. They're things that you can do together. They're things that you can take time to do on your own. But building in some stress management, even when you don't think you need it, is going to keep you from needing as much of it. Seek counseling. I always think it's better to get counseling, again, before you're in crisis. We want to keep that baseline coping high. And if things are just wearing away and your baseline is getting lower and lower, you can get some services, you can get some counseling, and you can bring that baseline back up, but it takes time and work. If you can be diffusing and managing and coping and processing in a more regular way, that baseline stays up versus coming down and having to be brought back up. It's always the right time to pay attention to yourself, to do counseling. If you find that you are sad or tearful almost every day for 2 weeks, you're feeling worthless or hopeless, you're having difficulty concentrating, you're having diminished interest or pleasure in activities that you've always liked before, you have lost your appetite, or you're overeating, or you're sleeping too much, or you're having new onset of panic attacks or other symptoms, run, don't walk. Get help. Treatment can include medication for mood or anxiety, counseling, or both. And the combination of the two, I think, is ideal. The medication can sort of help you get to that place where you're able to do the real work that comes through the counseling process. Remember, your needs are important. You have to take care of yourself in order to take care of somebody else. You are deserving of help and support, even if you are caring and helping and supporting somebody else. You deserve love, respect, and appreciation, and you deserve a life and identity separate from your role as a caregiver. So a lot of times people find that they get in this kind of caregiving role and the relationship dynamic changes, and people can all start to feel like, you know, this is not my husband anymore, like I feel like I'm the mom. You want to try to really avoid those and maintain that sort of identity, self-identity that you had prior to becoming a caregiver. And the other thing is really taking time and finding ways to honor the relationship. When it becomes a situation where the caregiving role has become so primary, it can be really easy to lose that connection to the person that you're with. You didn't marry somebody to become their caregiver. It's part of what we commit to when we marry, but you married them because you liked them, they made you laugh, you did fun things together. Finding time and giving attention to honoring that aspect of the relationship is so crucial. across the relationship, but even more so when the caregiving role has grown to a higher level. So really take the time to pay attention to the relationship that existed before the caregiving so that that connection stays strong.